groups of First Nations people are hosting us, and we're grateful to that host. And also some Métis people, Area 3, also are here. So thank you for that. And this presentation today is part of a larger effort at the University of Calgary. It's EDI week, it's Diversity Week, and this is our Alberta Civil Liberties Research Center's contribution to the event. I encourage you to check out their website because they have different speakers planned every day, and it's quite an excellent program. Our main speaker today is Myrna, whose screen looks like a cloud right now. I assure you she's not in the clouds. She's a lovely woman, but we are having some technical difficulties and these things happen. And perhaps the camera will calm down once we get started. We ask you to, if you have any questions, to put them into the chat, please, and there will be time at the end for questions. And Myrna works for us at the Research Center. She's our research associate, and she has a very extensive background in human rights law, including a master's degree in that topic. And she has been working for us on a number of issues related to civil liberties and COVID-19, as we all have. It's been a busy topic this year. So without further delay, I will introduce you to, oh, we're starting to see you a bit more,
Okay.
to Myrna, and she will give you her presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Linda, for the introduction. I am really sorry about the camera. I have no idea what happened. 10 minutes ago was totally fine. So, and that shows with technology, you never know. So no matter how prepared you are, something will happen. But thank you everyone for being here. I know this topic is very important. A lot of people need to know more about COVID-19 vaccination. But before I start, I want to make it clear that I'll be covering this topic from a legal point of view. So I'm not going to talk about personal beliefs or personal preferences or opinions regarding the vaccine. So why talking about this topic? As we know by now, proof of COVID vaccination has been required by different businesses, employers, and many other institutions. However, some individuals cannot provide such a proof for medical reasons, such as disability or religious beliefs. So what we need to know is when it comes to the pandemic, including lockdown, mandatory mask, or vaccination, we need to have a balance between individual rights and public safety, especially when there is a public health crisis. So do employers and businesses have the right to mandate vaccination? The answer is yes. They have the right to do so in order to protect their staff and customers. As we know, most businesses have suffered economically during the pandemic. So they have to depend on a high percentage of the population being vaccinated in order to return to normal business. So these businesses can have their own policies because they have an obligation to keep their staff and customers safe. They can set their own rules and refuse to serve unvaccinated individuals. And that's why these businesses have imposed safety measures during the pandemic, such as requiring face covering, hand washing, and social distancing for customers and employees. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act in Alberta, employers have a duty to protect their workers by providing a safe workplace. We know by now that COVID-19 virus is contagious and can be deadly sometimes. Therefore, an employer can impose a mandatory vaccination policy in the workplace. Now, if employers fail in their obligation to provide a safe workplace, they can be held liable for negligence. Employers and businesses need to accommodate their employees and customers who, for a medical reason, such as a disability or religious belief, cannot be vaccinated. And we'll talk later about accommodation. So according to the Alberta Human Rights Act, every person has a right to equal treatment without discrimination due to specific identified protected grounds. So an exemption from mandatory vaccination policies can take place where an individual requires accommodation on the basis of a ground protected by the Alberta Human Rights Act. In the case of a disability, employees or individuals who have a medical condition that does not allow them to get vaccinated may seek accommodation from their employer or service provider. But those who seek accommodation on the basis of disability would need to demonstrate that they have a medical condition. So it's not enough to say that I have a disability, we need to prove that. So the medical exemption must be an original letter from a physician or nurse. And this letter can be used to enter any business that requires proof of vaccination. So when it comes to religious belief, I am not talking about personal preferences or opinion. I am only talking about religious prohibition, meaning practitioners of a certain faith that endorses taking the vaccine may find their request denied. And according to the Alberta Human Rights Commission, only religious beliefs that are sincerely held and connected to a faith must be accommodated in an area protected under the Alberta Human Rights Act. And so far, we have no decision showing a valid religious exemption from the COVID-19 vaccine. We have many cases that have been filed with the Alberta Human Rights Commission or Ontario Human Rights Commission based on religious belief, but most of them got dismissed. So, and in addition to the protected grounds, and according to the Alberta Human Rights Act, every person has the right to equal treatment in services and employment without discrimination because of religious belief or disability. But what is discrimination? Discrimination means treating a person or group differently because of their race, age, religion, disability, sex, etc. So discrimination means failure to provide reasonable accommodation for the special needs of a person when their needs are based on protected ground in the Alberta Human Rights Act. Vaccination requirements are not a discriminatory practice because they are necessary to protect public health and safety. Our rights are not absolute. Reasonable limits can be placed on our rights when it applies to public safety and health. So people who cannot get vaccinated, again, as I mentioned before, for disability or religious reason, may be discriminated against. Even if these individuals are, let's say, medically exempt, they may still be treated differently. We basically have two justifications allowing an individual to receive a medical exemption from the COVID vaccine, which are allergies or adverse reactions. So businesses and employers must attempt to balance the right of people who have not been vaccinated due to a protected ground while ensuring individual and collective rights to health and safety. So businesses and employers must attempt to balance the right of people who have not been vaccinated due to a protected ground while ensuring individual and collective rights to health and safety. Employers and businesses have a duty to accommodate those who cannot get the vaccine unless it would interfere with people's health and safety. So if an employee has a physical or mental disability as defined by the Alberta Human Rights Act and cannot be vaccinated, the employer has a duty to accommodate that person. So accommodation is a process through which individuals, for example, individuals with disabilities, have equal access to services. Businesses have a duty to accommodate only those who are unable to receive a vaccine for reasons relating to a prohibited ground of discrimination under the Alberta Human Rights Act. However, accommodation is provided to a certain limit. Only, we say, to the point of undue hardship, and I will talk later about undue hardship and what we mean by undue hardship. So mandating and requiring proof of vaccination is allowed under the Alberta Human Rights Act, as long as businesses make sure that those who cannot get vaccinated are reasonably accommodated. Businesses will need to accommodate those people unless doing so would be impossible to the business considering health, safety, and cost. So employers and businesses are required to provide a reasonable accommodation, not a perfect accommodation. If the employer or business is offering the employer or customer reasonable accommodation and that the employer or customer are not happy with that, they cannot refuse the accommodation just because it's not an ideal accommodation. When we talk about accommodation, we talk about alteration or adjustment to the delivery of service so that those services become accessible to many people. Example of adjustment that employers or businesses can make to their policies or work conditions when it comes to COVID-19 is, for example, requiring the employee to work remotely when possible. Requiring the employee to wear PPE, personal protection equipment, such as face masks, face shields, or gloves. Requiring regular COVID-19 tests, or adjusting working conditions to accommodate physical distancing from other employees. Now, if an employee requests to wear a mask or work from home, and if the employer refuses to permit this as an accommodation, the employer can violate the human rights law. But the right to be free from discrimination can be limited sometimes, especially in a pandemic. So in this situation, accommodation is not possible. And this is what we call undue hardship, where the duty to accommodate becomes limited. And this is where we say the legal limit is called undue hardship. So according to the Alberta Human Rights Commission, undue hardship occurred if accommodation would create difficult conditions for an employer, such as unacceptable financial costs or serious disruption to business. If the work requires employees to be vaccinated, the employer may need to consider offering them the option of working from home. But if the work cannot be done remotely, the employer can deny the request to work remotely on the ground of undue hardship. Of other people, then it would be considered undue hardship. So those who cannot get vaccinated cannot be discriminated against, as I mentioned before, but that comes with limits. Businesses have an obligation to accommodate people who have exemptions, but they also have an obligation to protect the health and safety of their customers and staff. Example of factors that may amount to undue hardship: financial cost that hurts the viability of the service or the workplace, significant interference with the right of others, health and safety concerns for the individual being accommodated or for other customers or co-workers. Now, if those who cannot get vaccinated believe that they have been discriminated against, they can file a human rights complaint with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. If an employer or service provider fails to carry out their duty to accommodate, they can be held liable. Now, a business or an employer who is accused of discrimination can prove that discrimination was reasonable and justifiable under Section 11 of the Alberta Human Rights Act. a business or an employer can argue that they reasonably accommodated the complainant to the point of undue hardship. But if the business or employer is not successful in their argument, then the complainant can get a remedy. Thank you for listening. Now I am happy to answer your question, and here you have some information regarding our center if you would like to email us or contact us. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you very much, Myrna. While everybody's thinking about what their questions are, I have a couple questions. What kind of medical information would an individual have to disclose in order to be accommodated? So if their employer is saying, look, you know, we need you to be vaccinated, and they're asking for an exemption for medical reasons, what sort of information is required?
Yeah, first we need to know that every accommodation is different because every situation is different, and people have different needs, even if we're talking about the same disability. But if they need an accommodation, they need to disclose some information. Now, they don't have to disclose everything related to their, let's say, medical condition or disability, but they have to disclose enough information in order for the employer to be able to accommodate them. Now, how much information, again, it depends on the situation. They don't have to go to the doctor and bring all their file and submit it to the employer, but whatever is needed for the accommodation, in order for the employer, in order to accommodate that that individual, has to be submitted.
And what about undue hardship? Can you talk some more about undue hardship? Is it like, what is the onus on the employer or service provider in terms of showing something's an undue hardship?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about undue hardship, we're basically talking about impossible accommodation, meaning, as I give some examples, we talk about mostly about something is going to cost the employer a lot to accommodate that individual, or it's going to put other people at risk. In both situations, the employer can say, I cannot accommodate because that's going to basically hurt my business. And this is what we call undue hardship. So undue hardship is not like the employer says, like, you know, just the fact that they say, I cannot accommodate that person. They have to prove that it's going to cost a lot, let's say, to accommodate that person, or it's going to harm other people. So there should be some kind of evidence showing that it's impossible for the employer to accommodate that person. And this is what we call to the point of undue hardship.
So they would have an obligation to provide some evidence of what it's going to do if they have to accommodate this person.
Yeah, exactly. So they cannot just come and say, oh, we cannot, you know, but just because they don't want to accommodate someone. They have to show that they weren't able to accommodate that and why they weren't able to accommodate that person. Did
you mention at the beginning that there have been cases before the Human Rights Commission, or there haven't been any?
They have been not related to the vaccine, though. So it was mostly related to mask mandates. So, but whenever it was related to religious belief, or some people just went there and they said, oh, I have a disability, and this, let's say there was this case with Costco, and I said, oh, they didn't want to, you know, to accommodate me and so on. So it's not enough to say so. If you have a disability, you have to prove that you have a disability in order to be accommodated. The same thing with religious belief. Religious beliefs, they mostly have been dismissed because first, it's very rare to have a religion that doesn't allow vaccination, and you know, we don't know of any basic religion that said it's like you cannot be vaccinated. And that's why, again, it's not enough to come and say, oh, my faith doesn't allow me to be vaccinated. You have to prove that in order to be accommodated.
So we have a note in the chat You've mentioned that undue hardship arises in terms of the risk to other employees and customers. What sort of evidence would you expect to be used? What sort of threshold is going to meet the requirement of undue hardship when we are speaking about the risk that an unvaccinated person poses to others around them?
Yeah, so there was this restaurant bar in Calgary and we're talking about basically mask more than vaccines. They didn't allow a person to go inside the restaurant because they asked everyone to wear a mask, and that person refused to wear a mask, claiming that she had a disability and she wasn't able to wear a mask and so on. Now, she didn't provide any proof, but the owner of the restaurant didn't want to put the staff and other customers at risk. So they asked the person who refused to wear a mask to at least wear a face shield and so on, and she refused again. So the fact that if she doesn't wear a mask, she goes inside and they have a lot of customers inside and staff, it was risky for the owner to allow that person to go inside and put other people at risk. So, and again, if you don't have a proof, if you just say that I have a disability or I have, a religious belief that I cannot be vaccinated or I cannot wear a mask and so on, it's not enough to say so. You have to prove it. But again, even if you prove it and if it's going to put other people at risk, then the employer doesn't have, or the business doesn't have to accommodate that person.
I think Daryl was asking, what kind of evidence does the business have to put forward that it's going to cause a risk to other people?
Yeah, well, I mean, they have to prove that, they have staff inside. They cannot, let's say, social distancing, right? They don't have enough room to put everyone inside. And, I mean, it's enough for the fact that the person is not masked up to go inside and put other people at risk.
I would imagine there is some scientific evidence out there that an employer or business owner could point to as well. Some reliable information, say from Dr. Tam or some of these other experts out there who talk about what the risk is of masks and why they're, or whatever it is that vaccines or whatever. There's quite a bit of information out there. Not all of it's reliable, but usually I would guess that something coming from, the health department would likely be suitable, because, an employers can't do a study. they don't have the wherewithal to, hey, we can see you now, Myrna.
Okay.
So now I noticed there was another question. I think the letter K had a question. Did we resolve your question? I think it's Catherine.
Yeah, hi, I had my hand earlier. I was wondering if there's an employer who can accommodate someone working from home for quite some time, and they have done so easily with the past 2 or 3 years, however long it's been. And if that person, for whatever reason, doesn't want to get vaccinated or has grounds not to, and they still require vaccination, even though it's clearly possible for these people to work remotely and be accommodated in that way, what the law has to say in that respect.
Okay, so are we talking about someone who has a medical condition or religious?
Either or
just in general?
Like either or, if both scenarios, I guess, would be good to go through, because, and I had a follow-up question of, if someone was harmed by a vaccine, would they then qualify to not receive, say, a booster dose or something? Would they then qualify as a medical exemption to receiving future vaccines if they received harm from one.
Okay, well, okay, we can talk about both situations. So if someone has, let's say, has a medical reason to work from home and has been working, as you said, for 2 years from home, and then all of a sudden the employer says, oh, you have to come to the office and so on. Now, there should be a reason for the employer to ask for that. If there's no reason, they're just asking, you know, that employee to go back to the office, then the employer has to accommodate that person. But again, it depends on the situation. If the employer has a valid reason to ask the employee to go back to the office, then they can do so. Now, if the employee doesn't have any medical reason or religious belief to work from home, and they just refuse to go back to the office, then in that situation, I believe the employer has a right to do whatever they want, because they don't have to accommodate that person. So in order to talk about the duty to accommodate, we have to talk about either disability, medical reason, or religious belief. Otherwise, we don't talk about the duty to accommodate. Now, if someone got the vaccine and then, let's say, they got a reaction to that vaccine and so on, that can be called a medical reason, and then the employer has to accommodate that person.
Thank you. You know, can I add something, Myrna?
Sure.
A lot of this stuff, as an employer, a lot of this stuff has to do with effective communication between the employer and the employee. So rather than jumping right into some sort of legal dispute, a lot of times these things can be resolved through discussion. And if, you know, you can explain what your concerns are, and if the employer can realize that it's possible to accommodate you to the point of it's not going to cause an undue hardship, a lot of times they will be reasonable about it. So I'll give you a personal example. I had knee surgery and they wanted me to come back in and teach at the law school. And I wouldn't call it a medical concern, because I guess I could have physically got myself to the place to teach, but it would have taken a lot. And I talked to the dean and I just said, look, do you think it would be possible for me to teach from home? And they weren't thrilled about it, but they agreed to it. And I didn't have to provide any, you know, medical information or anything like that, although I guess I could have if I needed to. But it's all in how you communicate.
Yeah.
I would argue that goes a long way for any kind of accommodation. Everybody, and I noticed there's a couple people here who work with students, and we always talk about, you know, effective communication. You don't have to, like you said, you don't have to explain your entire disease and the diagnosis and all your files, but if there's enough information exchanged that can help the other party to understand what you need to do to be an effective employer or teacher or whatever, I think it goes a long way. Now you have a very long question. Can you see the chat, Myrna? Or shall I read it? I'll read it and you can read it too. It says, this person, Melissa, would like you to address situations where an employer's medical accommodations limited to very particular medical concerns and doesn't include all possible medical concern. For example, at the U of C, the medical accommodation request form requires that a physician sign off either that you have documented an immediate or severe reaction to the vaccine,
right,
that you have a history of thrombosis with, yikes, thrombocytopenia. Please forgive me if that's not pronounced right. That you have a history of MIS-C or MIS-A after the infection, either the infection or a vaccine, or you have myocarditis or pericarditis after the dose. And finally, diagnosed with COVID-19 and received a certain treatment. Those are the only, I guess, things that they will accept.
Okay. Well, I cannot, speak on behalf of any employer. Now, again, every situation is different, and so whatever they're asking of there, I cannot say if it's wrong or right, but I know that they have the right to ask for proof. As I mentioned before, they have to bring a letter from a physician or nurse and so on. Now, if they're making it impossible, in order to provide accommodation, that's a different situation. In that case, you can say that they're making it impossible for us to prove that we have a disability. That's something different. But if the employer thinks it's reasonable and, they relied on, I'm not sure, scientific data or something, and they're asking for that, then it's up to them. So again, I cannot talk on behalf of what they ask for. If you think it's unreasonable, then you can go and say, this is unreasonable and you are discriminated against me. But it's up to them to decide on what they ask for.
Again, I think communication would go a long way here, because the physician is going to have to tick one of 5 boxes. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Reading what you've got here. And what if the physician says, well, no, it's none of these things, but I still think you should have an exemption. Then I think there's going to have to be communication between the physician and the university to find out, to discuss this further, because, how's it, like, the physician may have a perfectly good reason that's not in coherence with one of those 5, and maybe the university never thought of it before or something. I don't know. They probably had their medical department look at it, but still, I think it would merit a discussion with the department that decides that, either as an employee of the university or a student.
It's an interesting question.
I didn't realize there were so many rules and regulations with regard to it. I figured it would be enough if the physician said the person has had this, has reasons for not taking the needle.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but I read that most of the physicians have said that it's very rare, not to be able to get the vaccine. This is what they said. So I'm not sure if the university is asking for all of this because of, what has been said, but so far this is what I read in the news.
Yes, and our Whitford says, if the chief medical officer says these are the conditions under which a doctor could provide a medical exemption, it seems to me that would be very good evidence for the employer.
Yeah, definitely.
The employers are not experts on these things.
Yeah, and I don't think we have something clear. It's like, what do we need to ask if we cannot get the vaccine? I'm not sure that we have like a clear list of of a reason. So
these must be, I'm not a doctor or anything, but these 5 things must be situations that have been proven to have occurred after a vaccine. And for that reason, they're pretty confident that that person should not have any more vaccines.
Yeah.
Okay, so the doctor would follow the College of Physicians and Surgeons list as well, right?
Mhm.
Because that's their job. They have to go with what they believe is the right.
Right.
I would think, though, if the person, Melissa, if you have a concern that you think something should be included on the list, then you would want to talk to either the chief medical officer or the College of Physicians and Surgeons to discuss your particular issue and say, why isn't this in there? You know, bring it to their attention, because I would imagine this is a very fluid thing. I mean, we're learning about it as we go along.
Yeah.
And I'll give you another example from my personal experience. It was my friend. My friend has a blood clotting disorder, and we were all excited the day that we were both born the same year. And so, of course, we could zip over and get our AstraZeneca shot. And on the way over to the shot, there was a radio announcement that they were discontinuing or holding AstraZeneca because it causes blood clots. And of course, like I said, my friend has a blood clotting disorder. So phoned her physician, and the physician said, well, go ahead, you know, but it was kind of scary because you just have to go with the information that's out there. And luckily she didn't have any reaction to it, but it made the experience rather nerve-wracking. And for all of us, because, and this blood clotting disorder, my friend had almost killed her at one point. It was a very serious problem. So, yeah, it was, but in the end, thankfully, she did get her shots and she did get COVID, but she didn't get too bad of a case of COVID. So it all turned out okay. Thank you very much for your sharing the link there to the medical exemption policy. It's in the chat.
Yeah. See it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it requires a whole lot of research and making sure that the source of the information is good as well, you know, like even that thing about the blood clots, they're not really sure anymore if that's, you know, a problem or if it was just the standard number of people who get blood clots in our population. So it's, you know, you just go with the best scientific information there is at the time and hope for the best.
Yeah. You know, my son's friend who's 15 years old, he got his first shot and he had a really bad reaction. I mean, he had to go to the emergency. He stayed there for 3 days. He was spitting up blood, and both his parents are doctors, and they had no idea what was happening with him. And still, after everything, they still don't know what happened. Of course, he didn't get the second one, but yeah, I mean, and he doesn't have any medical condition or something, but apparently had a severe reaction to the vaccine.
Okay, that's interesting. Catherine has heard that there have been people complaining that they have side effects, but these were not properly recorded or recognized. And medical professionals cannot, they risk losing their jobs if they write something like vaccine, a generic sort of vaccine harm discussion. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I had reactions to all 3 of my shots, and I had different things. I had 2 different ones. I just phoned 811 and I said, I need to record this reaction that I've had, and I left it at that. I am at such a high risk of having, the word is comorbidities. If you get it, I'm willing to take the chance from the needle. I don't want to die, and I don't want to take this disease to my parents. So that's my personal choice. But I understand that sometimes physicians might be put in a difficult position if they think that a person should not have it. When I phoned my doctor and said, you know, AstraZeneca is available, and my doctor's response was, the best vaccine for you to take is the first one that you can get. So that I followed my doctor's advice.
Yeah, and also, I mean, when we talk about side effects, we need to know what we're talking about, like, because side effect, is it like, you know, I had a headache, or I had a sore arm, or like my son's friend went to the emergency. So
If I may clarify.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about someone who went to the emergency, or their son did, and they couldn't get proof that they had been in the emergency with pericarditis. People going deaf from the vaccine, which I think is hardly a small effect. But on that vein, if someone's suffering tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears after one vaccine, we have to weigh the risks well. Would they go deaf if they got more of them? We don't know. It's a big question that is impossible to answer right now with the experience that we have on something that's so new. So it's complicated.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a new experience for everyone, right? So I believe maybe later they will have answers to all these questions.
Oh,
but
and there was
everyone has experience, you know. So
in the US, sorry, I don't remember, like when I filled out the feedback of did you have any symptoms, I didn't personally, so that wasn't an issue. But I noticed here it was multiple choice, and they had mentioned for studies in the US on the children, it was multiple choice, and you couldn't say what one of the children said, and I'm sure this is very rare, but if it happens, they should take accommodation to it. She couldn't put in how bad her reaction was because it was multiple choice. All they could put in was that she had a stomach ache, not that she was in the hospital for, you know, however long, I don't know, with something seriously wrong. But the closest thing they could put in the multiple choice was a stomach ache.
Oops, Myrna, I think your mic's not working.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. Yeah, well, I believe that it's up to the medical profession here to you know, to manage those situations. So I'm not really sure, you know, I mean, because I'm beside my son's friend, I'm not aware of anyone who had a severe reaction to the vaccine. So I'm not really sure how they report those incidents and what happened with them. So I'm not really sure about that.
It's a good question to ask the college.
Yeah.
Excuse me. You know, I'm sure once this is all through, we look back on it, there will be things that we would change. It's just like everything was such a panic when it first happened. Although, you know, my understanding is that when they're going to be giving these, especially to children, they do studies and they don't release them until they're satisfied that it's safe for the children. You know, as a parent, I have a 10-year-old child. I know I look old and I am old, but I do have a 10-year-old child, and you have to, you know, because you're making this decision for a child, right? And it's scary. And but you have to rely on your doctor and what's out there, and you know, and hopefully everything will be okay, you know, because the alternative of getting the disease or someone in your family getting the disease is so terrifying. I have 90-year-old dad, and there's no way I'd want to take something to him because he wouldn't survive. I know he wouldn't. So yeah, that's interesting. I think there's going to be lots of discussions about how things were done, and how they weren't done, and you know, and there's so much information out there. It's one of the things about the information age is one of the downsides, don't you think, Myrna, is that
Yeah.
there's just so much information out there that it's really hard to decide what to do.
Yeah.
It was harder for me to decide what to do for my parents, who I have guardianship of, and my child, because you're making the decision for somebody else, and it's really hard, but you just have to hope that it's the right thing and trust their doctor. And so far so good for me. I guess I'm lucky.
Question, why is this not
Wow, okay.
the same for other flus or requirement of vaccine from employers and regarding on? Okay, now we're going into a scientific research. So where I mean,
that is an interesting question. I know
Yeah.
that UFC offers free flu shots,
yeah,
but it's not mandatory.
yeah. Well, the flu shots are mandatory for some health workers. I know that. Not everywhere, but in some places they are required to get the flu shot. Now, why they're not making it the same? Where I mean, we don't know. We are not the doctors. We are not scientific
No,
experts. So
we're
they
lawyers.
have to decide on this. Not us. We are lawyers. So
As again,
and
I said,
we follow basically the science. So we cannot really say why they're not treating it like the flu.
yeah, and also, you know, the sheer numbers of people that have passed away, died because of COVID. I think, not to say there aren't people who die from the flu, but the numbers all over the world are just stunning. So we have to keep that in mind. This question here is interesting.
Yeah.
Could there be different accommodations for the same person if they were in different roles? So for example, would you get a different accommodations if you're a student as opposed to an employee?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because as I said, every accommodation is different, and probably the one who's a student needs a different accommodations than being an employee. So yeah, you definitely can get different kind of accommodation because it depends on the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure they're going to actually allow for, say, as a student, if they decide they want everybody back in school, then if that person can't have a vaccine, I don't think they're going to just have at-home education for that one person.
Mm.
I think that would fall in the category of undue hardship for the college, but
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Heather's got her hand up.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to elaborate on my question there. So for instance, if you had a student who was also an employee at, for instance, a post-secondary institution, could you have a different accommodation protocol for the student as a student and as an employee? So for example, if they were providing negative rapid tests to be on campus, could you then impose further, I guess, restrictions or requirements on the student as an employee, such as, for instance, if they were peer tutoring, could it be necessary to have them attend remotely or work remotely when they're doing that, even if they're allowed to be on campus with a negative rapid test?
Well, I believe so, but again, and you know, it depends on the situation. If the student's working as an employee, and let's say in this department, and everyone in that department is required to do something specific, and that student has to do it as an employee and ask for an accommodation, they should be able to get an accommodation, unless you know, it's going to be impossible to accommodate that person and so on. So I believe so, but I really don't know how the situation is going to be.
And I think that's fair in the law. The duty to accommodate is very contextual.
Yeah.
Context is everything. It varies from one place to the next place, and
Yeah.
And it depends on the facts of the case.
So as I mentioned earlier, if you have two people with the same disability and working for the same employer, their accommodation can be totally different. So we don't have two similar situations. So if the person is as a student and working as an employee, they can have different needs depending on the position.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, it's a realistic question, because there's a lot of people in a post-secondary institution, and there are many different roles, and some people play more than one role whilst they're there. So it's one thing to have sort of a blanket policy. It's another thing if people ask for an accommodation and they have there's a duty to do it, and how do we do it properly and legally? It's there's a lot of people on campus at any given time, except for right now, because they're all at home right now. But, well, I shouldn't say that. There's probably some on campus right now, but most of the people are at home.
So no need for accommodation.
Well, the accommodation I have is using online education. So, and the students are stuck with that, whether they like it or not, unfortunately. So, any other questions? It looks like we might be almost finished. We have on our website, we have a tab where we've put together everything we've written on COVID-19 and some of the policies. Of course, you know that this changes constantly, but check our website. Oh,
There's a question.
Sorry, I went too fast. I thought we were done. How many people have seen accommodations for medical or religious granted?
I can tell for religious belief, none. For medical, well, I'm not aware of any. And that's mostly we had cases related to mask mandate more than the vaccine. I'm not sure if the courts are looking into something related to vaccine now, but I'm not aware of any. So everything we have so far, excuse me, is related to mask mandate, and I believe most of them have been dismissed.
So we can't tell you how many people in general.
Yeah.
We just know about the cases that have been brought forward.
Yeah.
To complain they weren't accommodated or they were discriminated against. So
like I can mention one case that took place in Ontario, and where the employer asked for proof of vaccine or mandated vaccination, and the arbiter considered that it was unreasonable for the employer to ask for that. That was the only case, and that took place in Ontario. And they said the employer doesn't have to do that. They can basically, employees work from home and so on. So that was the only case that I'm aware of.
yeah, and most of the commissions have a policy statement, a generic policy statement that you can check out to see if your situation merits proceeding to make a complaint. It gives you the details that the way things are, what their opinions are on the matter. Like there's one on our commission's website, right? And there's Ontario has one.
Yeah.
So, also, you should know that if your employer is federally regulated, you need to look at the federal Canadian Human Rights Commission website. So things like banks and other federally regulated companies, you would see the policy on the federal Human Rights Commission website.
Yeah.
I just want to give, that's interesting. So many post-secondary institutions do have procedures for medical exemptions, and some have been granted, but the person, if they're given the exemption, from a vaccine, they will still have to do the rapid testing, which can in itself be kind of hard because it's hard to get a hold of those tests right now. But I have 5 at my house. I could be, no, I'm not going to sell them. I was just kidding. My grandson, they sent them home from school. I'm supposed to use them on him if he looks sick. So.
Yeah, Linda, I just wanted to clarify something. When I answered the question, it says how many people have seen accommodation for medical or religious granted. I'm talking about complaints. So
yeah,
we are not aware
that.
of, yeah, because I don't want people to think like, you know, some companies, I'm sure some people got accommodated by their
yes,
employers or businesses and so on. So we're talking just about the complaints because we are not aware of, you know, what happened within the company or within businesses.
And there's another post-secondary institute that's got some accommodations going as well, virtual attendance and proctoring. So it seems like it depends on which institution you're in. And so what we get is when it gets to the end of the line and the person's not accommodated and they make a complaint, then we have access to that, some of that information. Because of course, complaints in the beginning are kept confidential. So until it gets to a certain level, then we find out about that complaint.
I want to mention that the Alberta Human Rights Commission website has enough information related to vaccine mandates. So if anyone is interested, you can just
I think it's pretty good.
Website. Yeah.
I think their general materials are quite good on that. I send a lot of people over there to get help if they need it. Yeah. I think we might be finished. Thank you for your contributions, especially those of you who have access to accommodation policies in your own particular institutions. That's very helpful to us. Oh, I recognize a few names too, people from the PADRA and stuff, which is the institution of that does disabilities in post-secondary institutions. All right. Well, I hope we'll all see each other in person soon. And thank you, Myrna, so much for doing this. It's the law always takes a while to catch up to the reality of what's going on, right? But that's how we live in our society. So, and again, I encourage you to check out the other events that are being held on campus this week. Yes, I want everyone to be well too. Thank you, Union 52 Civic Service. We all want to stay healthy, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to mention that on our website also we have many articles related to COVID-19.
Yeah,
everything has been happening since March 2020. So
yeah, we got the tab. Yeah. So I think that's everything.